Hello, you're listening to Lockdown Lessons with me, Tasnim.
And me, Esther. We're wellbeing practitioners from IAP services in the South West London and St George's Mental Health NHS Trust. For the past 175 years, our trust has been providing inpatient and community mental health services to its local residents.
For all of us, 2020 has been a year like no other. Life has been full of uncertainty, and it's not always been easy to cope.
In this podcast series, we'll be talking all about how to take care of our well-being during the current pandemic and beyond.
Welcome to Lockdown Lessons.
Hello, you're tuned in to episode 5 of Lockdown Lessons. I'm Esther.
And I'm Tasnim. In this episode, we're going to be talking all about the challenges in maintaining your well-being as a parent. So we're delighted to be joined by a special guest, Hadil Arman, who works in the wellbeing team at Talk Wandsworth. Welcome to the show, Hadil.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you, guys.
Our pleasure. Thanks for coming. So before we get into the discussion, we just wanted to start by finding out what our favourite books were as a child. We're going to be rewinding the clock a bit. Tasnim, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, why not? So I had a couple of favourites, but one that kind of comes to mind right now is The Hungry Caterpillar. I just used to love reading that book, all the kind of different, I think it was fruits that the caterpillar would eat and then kind of become a butterfly. And just the whole concept now, thinking back, at the time I don't think I realised like the significance of all of it because I was young, but kind of the fact that growth takes time and it's a process and all of that stuff, like looking back at it now, I think it's really meaningful to me. So yeah, I'd say that's my favourite book. What about you guys?
Well, I mean, for me personally, I really loved The Hungry Caterpillar, and I definitely still have this book called Molly's Hair, which I don't really know what the general like moral takeaway is, but it was basically this book where this girl Molly had this incredible orange, fiery ginger hair, and you could touch it in the book. So it was like it came out.
Oh, wow.
And then as it went on, her hair got more and more kind of massive and curly and incredible and sparkly towards the end. And there was like tinsel in amongst her hair. And I absolutely loved it. And then I got really big hair. I mean, I don't think it was because of the book, but
You never know.
you never know. Maybe it was a magic book. So I had quite big frizzy hair. So maybe Molly just gave me confidence in my frizz.
Yeah.
But I do still remember it and I've never let it go. I think I'll pass it on to future generations. But be you be true was the message, I think, of Molly's Hair. Love what you've got.
Love that. And what about you, Hadil?
So for me, I think the door to sort of reading and things like that came actually as a teenager. So there was a girl in school that, I just wanted to start reading, and then she gave me this book, and it's I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's called Noughts and Crosses.
Oh,
I've heard of it,
yeah. And it was just, I don't know, it was the first book that I couldn't put down. Obviously, as a child, like you get told, hey, read a book, but I was never really like willingly doing it. So yeah, I think it's that book for me that that is the one that I could mostly remember.
Wow, that was such an amazing. I remember reading that in the loo. I couldn't put it down.
Yeah.
It was incredible. Mallory Blackman, wasn't it?
Yep.
Why do you think it engaged you so much?
Do you know what? Because the story was just so. It was just knowing the story to be opposite of what was in society, and it was almost like possibly one of the first introductions to sort of actualizing what is actually happening within our society. And the fact was, if a book could be written in a way that's completely opposite, it's like, this is interesting. And obviously the romance side of it, I was a sucker for those types of things as well as a teenager. So I think it was those things that interested me.
Amazing. So Hadil, you are a mother of 2 young children, and with schools closing during the pandemic, how did your kind of responsibilities and routine change as a result of that?
So initially with the first lockdown, of course, it was just a shock, I think is the perfect word. I can explain it. And then obviously with the responsibilities, it was like back then it was morning run, afternoon run was no longer, at bedtime, for example. All these different types of things had to change because now we were trying to deal with, especially then, we weren't exactly going out. I know the exercise outside your home was introduced, but we would say we were on the side of being extremely cautious. And so at the beginning, we were literally at home, and the only outing we did was going to the shop, for example, and things like that. So that affected everything in the house. There was more cooking to be done, there was more cleaning to be made, and all sorts. So I think in that sense it changed. But since then, with every lockdown, there's been new and developing changes, and you can, like, I can never really judge it, I can never really plan it, because I don't know what would happen personally during that time. But then also I have to consider what would happen for the kids, in a sense of, will one of them, not show signs of being extremely unhappy, or maybe behavior signs and all these things. I can't judge it. So it's almost always having to deal with sort of the unknown and then adapting my responsibilities with that, which of course is hard. So yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine it must have been such a shock. Has that returned, that feeling? Because obviously there's been this constant change with regards to kind of schools opening and closing, and then opening and closing. And you mentioned the uncertainty. Has that shock returned, or does it feel like this is more normalized now? How does the uncertainty sit with you now?
The uncertainty, I think over time, maybe some of us, especially because, of the wellbeing team and everything that we do, I've been pushed in a way to be able to build up some coping mechanisms, if that makes sense. The shock is not the same, in a sense of, it might be different for different people. So maybe the first lockdown for some eventually was maybe an opportunity, but now it's like, okay, this is getting too much now. And now maybe the shock kicks in. But for me personally, the shock was at the very start, in a sense of, is this real? Like, is this actually real? Like, what is going on? And now it's not the same type of shock. It's the feeling of, it's like having a ball inside of you. And then every now and then you're just getting on with it. And then as soon as sort of lockdown happens, it sort of bounces around, if that makes sense. But the ball is much smaller and the effect is much smaller as well. It's sort of a similar example to, what we would say about grief, for example. The ball is much smaller, and I'm able to, I guess, cope with it a little bit better because I just take every day as it is now. And I'm just trying to put in my mind that, do you know what? I just have to take every day as it is, and I can't control anything. I can't overtly plan anything. Of course, you have to have certain plans for you and your children and the near future. But ultimately, I'm just trying to reassure myself, through my internal talk or self-talk, if you like, that, do you know what? Just, have this penciled in, but anything can happen. And I think that's what's made me feel a lot better and be able to sort of deal with the different types of shocks that I've been going through, basically.
I think that's a great piece of advice, taking every day as it comes, because as you said, there's so much that's outside of our control and there's only so much that we can do. So reminding ourselves of that, I think, is really, really important.
Thank you.
So what has your experience been in regards to taking care of your own well-being whilst also attending to the needs of your family, so taking care of, their well-being at the same time? How has that been for you?
Okay, so one thing that comes to mind here first, sort of like the first thing that comes to my mind, is the typical thing that parents, I guess, are told, and specifically, speaking for myself, mothers are told that, and I was actually listening to this in a podcast the other day. It's like, when you are told as a parent that you are selfless, it's a compliment, but really, where is the compliment in being selfless? Because when you are completely selfless, it's almost like you're not leaving anything for yourself. So how will you be the best part of yourself for those around you? And speaking about parents, for your children, and for the family home and things like that. And I guess in the beginning, and I'm sure a lot of parents can relate, we are sort of the security for our children, and we are that bubble, especially when they're very young, and my children are very young. And being that security, they always want to feel reassured, they always want to feel safe. But then with all these lockdowns, we are human beings, and so we are going to go through the different types of emotions and the insecurity that comes with it. And I guess I had to really do things that helped me as an individual, yes, as a mother, but me as an individual, that would entail help my children and help me be a better mother to them, because I'm never going to be a perfect mother. I will make mistakes throughout my parenthood and throughout my motherhood, but it's about inputting into me to be able to give to them as much as I can, better sort of experiences, right? And I guess for me, with the 5 areas of well-being, so I didn't know this at the time, of course, in detail, but one area that I would say relating back to the 5 areas of well-being is spiritually. For me, spirituality had a huge role to play throughout. It's the one thing I would say that allows me to cope with things much better. It's the one thing that would allow me to just stay sane throughout it all, right? And again, going back to the uncertainty and the feelings of uncertainty, it just allows me to cope with it better, basically. So that is the one thing I did in a sense of for myself. But then other things I did was I limited the amount of, news I was taking in, right? So for example, something happened, I won't mention it on the podcast just in case, but there was news last night that I didn't even read into because I didn't want it to make me feel worse, if that makes sense. So doing things like that has helped just my mental stay away from too much negativity, especially with things like our phones and constant information being sort of thrown at us. Limiting the amount that you intake helps, and personally I did this through, especially recently, but also at the time, was just limiting the amount of time I use on social media, right? Because especially with social media, it can work for you, but it can also work against you. And I did things like even talking about it in front of the children. I would make a conscious effort to not, as soon as, for example, negative news comes through, or as soon as there is a lockdown, or, schools are shut, I wouldn't react. I would try to leave the reaction to when the kids are in bed, or leave the conversations with other adults, over the phone or what have you. I would try to have that when the kids are in bed, just so I'm not exposing them to too much negativity as well. And admittedly, I sort of in the first lockdown completely binged watched Netflix, and that is absolutely fine, I just want to put it out there. Not in too much, not in the long run, but at the time that is what helped, and that became part of our routine as well. But those are some of the things that I did do to help me sort of take care of my well-being, but also try to, take care of the well-being of my family as best as I could, because there is no perfection and we will never attain that. So it's all about doing these things as best as we could, really.
That's so helpful, and there's so much in there that hopefully others can draw on, relate to, and maybe even try themselves. And you mentioned at the beginning there about the 5 areas of well-being, and spirituality being one of them. So for anyone listening that's kind of wondering what the other 4 are, we can kind of go through them now. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm putting myself on the spot here. So there's spirituality, and there's mentally, emotionally, physically, and socially. Is that the 5?
Yeah.
Great.
The 5 pillars,
Sometimes it can be helpful to think about our self-care and our well-being as having those 5 areas, so that we can think about, well, where am I at with each of those? How full is one of those areas for me? Am I putting a lot into one but nothing into the other? And it's really interesting to ask yourself the question. So like, what would my spiritual self-care look like? What would my mental self-care look like? And that could be a walk with a podcast, or it could be asking yourself, what do I value? What matters to me? It could be seeking volunteering. It could be so many things. It could be a call. So they don't have to be kind of life-changing, grandiose activities. They can be really small things, but they accumulate, and they can be, as Hadil's been saying, they can be amazing things to draw on in times where we really need to cope and dig deep.
And just to add on to that as well, some of them can also overlap. So it's not just trying to do one thing at a time, and again, just bringing it back to my personal example, I touched on, for example, and I tapped into the emotional side, so through journaling and writing, but also the spiritual side because of what I was writing as well. So it can overlap as well, just to mention.
Yeah, that is such a good point to mention, because often we work with mothers and they say, I'd love to do all of these things, but like, I'm so busy. And the thing is, as Esther said, and as Hadil, you said as well, it is the small things, and it is the fact that these things can overlap. So even if you, let's say, go for a walk with your friend and you're having a coffee and you're, just talking about life, that's your physical well-being, that's your social well-being, and that's also, depending on what you're talking about, your mental and your spiritual and so on. So many of these things can come together. It's just about us prioritizing our well-being and making the time and effort to fit these things in.
And especially, do you know what, just to add on to that as well, as mothers, in taking care of our well-being, we have to be compassionate with ourselves, because even if I set a schedule, for example, right, this week I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to take care of myself, and then I'm not able to do those things, that's fine as well. It's not about at the end of that, I wasn't able to do this. No, it's about just being kind to yourself while you're trying to take care of yourself as well.
That's such a wonderful piece of advice, and it can be really hard to show that kindness to yourself when it can be somewhat easier to give it out, but to apply it back to yourself can be quite uncomfortable. How would you advise parents, carers, mothers, fathers, anyone listening that's thinking, how do I actually show myself that kindness when everything is kicking off and I feel like I've just got it all wrong?
Gosh, that's such a hard one, because a lot of us feel like that throughout, at different stages of parenthood. But I think if we're able to build certain skills of resilience generally in life, that would be extremely helpful. Just coping mechanisms, tapping into those things, tapping into coping mechanisms that, for example, as a teenager, personally speaking, as a teenager, when I used to revise for exams, I used to have lots of different snacks, chocolates, crisps, anything and everything that you could imagine. And it wouldn't make me sick. But now as an adult, if I tried that would not work. It would just make me feel completely sick. So that particular coping mechanism, for example, worked for me as a teenager, but it doesn't work for me now. But maybe I continue to do it because that is what I've been used to. So it's just about tapping into the coping mechanisms that we do as adults, seeing what works for us and what doesn't work for us, in order to sort of categorize it into our skills of resilience, right? And then the second thing as well, I would say, is just take a step back for a minute, reflect on how we deal with these situations. How do we react? What can we possibly do different that can work for us? Okay. And all of these things, every single one of these things takes time, and it takes practice, and it is habitual. It's not set, you're not going to wake up tomorrow, you're not going to listen, for example, to this podcast, you're not going to read an article, you're not going to read a book, and then tomorrow you're a new person. No, these things take time, they take practice, but it is definitely all very learnable, things that you can incorporate into your life. And the last thing that I said, which, I mentioned just a few minutes ago, was just having that self-compassion with yourself, okay? Trying to manage our negative self-talk as much as we can, because ultimately our minds and our thoughts go at 100 miles per hour, which is why one of the reasons that we journal, it almost, in my point of view, almost slows down our self-talk, and it almost allows us to literally just write out what is going on inside our mind. And so just to give a quick example, I might think of a particular thing, from the top of my mind, I can see my curtain in my room, right? I'll think of my curtain, but that might jump however many steps to a completely different thought in my mind. But I wouldn't assess how that had happened unless I really break down, that cycle of thoughts. And so just like that, when we are writing and when we are journaling, it's slowing down our self-talk, and it is just allowing us to analyze how we are talking to ourselves in our mind. And maybe we've never even given that a go, so we wouldn't know how badly we have been talking to ourselves and how much we may have been used to doing that. So if we can do those things, just trying to manage it as much as we can, these things will be, helpful. Not feeling that pressure. I know there's pressure from all different parts and all different types of society, whether that's family, friends, and all the rest of it, but just trying to incorporate these things hopefully will be things that allow us to cope in the long run, because it's not like things will just stop happening. Kids won't stop stressing you out. They will continue. Life will continue to throw things at you that you don't expect. And it's just about trying as best as we can to cope with these things through these skills.
Can I ask when you journal? Because I think that writing, as you said, to slow down that self-talk and challenge that inner self-critic can be so beneficial. And I've heard that some people find it really useful at the beginning of the day, like as a way to kind of prepare them. Some people find it more of a kind of reflective end of day activity. And also just in busy life, getting that time to just do it, even for a little bit, can be hard to find. So when do you do it?
So for me, it's not sort of an everyday thing. It would just be at random parts, I feel like, when I need it most, because again, time plays a part in it. But I'm glad you asked me that, because you don't just have to write. You can also do things like voice note yourself, just record yourself speaking out, just taking those thoughts outside of your mind so it can actually be out. It could be through things like just, art therapy. But for me personally, it's worked most when I've needed it most. So when my mind, for example, would be in complete overrun, or I'm just feeling an extreme sense of pain or sadness or whatever it is, I just want to sort of ground myself back to now, ground myself to what really matters for me. And that's when it's worked for me personally the most. Honestly, it's just about practice. It's just about giving it a go. It's just about pushing that little person telling you this won't work or this is embarrassing. A friend of mine once said that this paper has no judgment, absolutely no judgment. And it's just about taking that into play, really.
I actually have a question. Obviously, you are a mother, you have your young children. And I was thinking there might be some people listening who have a child on the way, whether that's having a child that they're giving birth to or they're about to foster or adopt. Do you have any advice for them in terms of how to think about their well-being to come? Because they're about to start that journey and in these uncertain times that we're in. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, definitely. I think the number one thing I would say is, hey, do you know what? While you're pregnant, you may be feeling down as well. So definitely be aware of those feelings as well. But if it is your first child or even second or even third, because every single one can be different, I would say just manage your expectations and really rein it in with reality. You can have certain wishes, like I want to give birth in this way, I want to give birth in that way, but just try to manage your expectations as much as possible and also be aware of, the signs of, for example, things like postnatal depression as well. Remember that in the beginning it is very, very, very and can be very difficult, and just trying to manage all of that and taking care of yourself as much as you can with no pressure there. Those are the things that I would definitely say. Manage your expectations.
So reflecting on everything that has taken place during this pandemic, Hadil, what has been your learning or takeaway from this whole experience?
I think the number one thing, and it's almost been like a theme in what I've been saying, is the fact that nothing is set in stone. I think this has been the number one takeaway that, again, has been helping me just coping with life, really, and with everything that it brings. So definitely, if there is one thing I'll say it for a third time, absolutely nothing is set in stone. And that's not to say that we can't enjoy aspects of life. It's just bearing that in mind for when things that we're not happy about happen or take place.
That's
so
wonderful.
Just reminding yourself of the impermanence of things. And would you say that you remind yourself on a regular basis, or is it just something that you've learned over time to keep in mind?
Yeah, no, I've definitely learned that over time. I probably learned that when I was like 17 years old because of a life experience. But since then, I've definitely had that in my mind. But again, I've always had to balance it with certain things where maybe I'd turn something away or I'd say no to something because that's been in my mind. So I have had to manage that as well. But it's definitely worked for me when things have happened that, I'm not completely in agreement with. That it's helped me with those aspects. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much, Hadil, for joining us today. So we've come to the end of the first series of lockdown lessons. We hope you've all enjoyed listening to these episodes as much as we've enjoyed making this podcast. And we hope that there's been at least one wellbeing lesson that you can take away with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us for the series. We've absolutely loved making it, and we're actually saying goodbye to Tasnim today as she is moving on in a very exciting career move. So we'd just like to say a massive thank you to Tasnim. You'll be greatly missed, but we'll try and make you proud. So we'd like to end the series with a quote in a difficult time. So it's from The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. And the quote is, "We often wait for kindness, but being kind to yourself can start now." So we leave you with that. Take care, everyone. Due to the current climate, we are holding one-to-one telephone workshops and online group sessions.
We offer a wide range of wellbeing workshops to residents aged 18 or over who live in or have a registered GP in the boroughs of Wandsworth, Merton and Sutton.
If you're interested to find out more about the services that we provide local to you, please find the relevant information in the episode description.
We'll be back soon with a new episode. Until next time, take care and goodbye.